Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C. Welcome to 2021, which is picking up pretty much exactly where 2020 left off, which is quite exciting for all of us. This is always an exciting time to be in Washington. We have a new Congress. We have a new administration coming in. Little more lively than normal in Washington, as many of you are probably aware. I can tell you that in DC, it's very quiet today. Very few people around, very little traffic on the streets. So for those of us who have to be in the office, it's not so bad. It's important to notice as we get started, though, democracies are very, very resilient forms of government. We can handle a lot of stress. And so the kind of noise that we've seen over the past year and the difficulties the country's had will be fine. Democracies can handle this sort of stuff better than any other form of government. And so we're going to get right into it. Lots going on, lots to talk about as Congress gets started. But I want to start, unfortunately, with some sad news. In our last update back in December, I let you know that the final well, actually second to last congressional race to be decided was a runoff in Louisiana, where Congressman-elect Luke Letlow won the final congressional seat in Louisiana. Unfortunately, apparently in the last couple days of the campaign, Mr. Letlow contracted COVID, and he unfortunately passed away right before Christmas. And so there'll be another runoff to decide who gets that seat, but we just wanted to recognize Congressman-elect Luke Letlow and acknowledge his passing. It's always a kind of tragic after all the work he put in that he never actually got to take office. Political update for where we are at the moment. As I'm sure most of you are aware, the Democrats have won both Senate seats in Georgia, much to many people's surprise, meaning the Senate will be split 50-50. Vice President Harris will break ties, legislative ties, after, of course, she's sworn in on January 20th. Until then, Mike Pence will break ties. But here's the thing. The Senate is not the same as the House. In the House of Representatives, when they pick a speaker, the entire House of Representatives gets together, they sit down, and they all vote. And whoever gets the most votes becomes speaker. And with being speaker comes a whole list of responsibilities and rights and powers. The Senate doesn't do that. What happens in the Senate is the Republicans go off into one room and the Democrats go off into another room, and they both elect a leader. Then the leaders come together, and by tradition, the leader with the bigger party in the Senate gets to become Senate Majority Leader, and the other person gets to become Senate Minority Leader. Thing is, there's no majority in the Senate. And while Vice President Harris will be able to break ties, she's not a senator, at least she won't be once she becomes vice president. Which means the Democrats aren't the majority party in the Senate, neither are the Republicans. Now, this has happened before. In 2000, the Senate was split 50-50 like it is now. And what happened then, and what will likely happen now, is the Republicans and Democrats will have to sit down and negotiate a power sharing arrangement. What that will mean is eventually that the Democrats, presumably Chuck Schumer, who will probably be elected the Senate Democratic leader, he will get to function as the majority leader. But he won't have quite the same amount of power, probably, as a typical majority leader, because he's not the majority leader because he doesn't have a majority. There will be some sharing of responsibility with, presumably, Mitch McConnell. In 2000, when Trent Lott was the majority leader over a split Senate, among other things, they created a new path for senators to bring legislation to the Senate floor. Typically, one of the rights of the Senate majority leaders to decide what comes up on the floor and what doesn't. In 2000, they created a new mechanism to allow senators to bring up a bill for a vote without the support of the speaker, of the majority leader, excuse me. In addition, in 2000, and probably now, the partisan makeup of committees in both the House and the Senate is related to the partisan balance in the chamber. If one party has a greater majority, they will get more of the seats on every committee, and that's negotiated between the two parties at the beginning of every Congress. Well, in a 50-50 Senate, typically the two parties are exactly equal, so both of them have an equal number of people on both committees. I suspect that will be the case this year as well. So the point of all this is that there's going to have to be a negotiation between the Republicans and Democrats in the Senate to figure out exactly how they're going to govern themselves. I do not anticipate that being a nice, smooth process, but they will figure that out in the next couple weeks, and then we'll have a clearer idea how the Senate is going to run itself. So before we move on to 2021, let's talk a little bit about 2020, because we, IEEE-USA, scored some fairly big wins during the 116th Congress. Almost all of those wins were in the last 2 days of a 2-year Congress, but wins are wins. Let's start with the budget. As you all know, the Congress finally did pass the fiscal 2021 budget. In general, most of our budgets did okay. A couple highlights: NASA, their budget was increased to $23.2 billion, which is an increase of $1 billion over fiscal 2020, which is good. That included $44 million new dollars for aeronautical research. Again, modest amount, but still pretty good. NIST's budget was effectively held steady at $1.06 billion. That's up $500,000, which in DC terms is hardly worth mentioning. That's basically an increase for inflation and not much else. Congress did allocate $730 million new dollars for rural broadband rollout. More on that later, but that's a good step in the right direction. NSF, National Science Foundation, the research arm of the federal government, saw its budget increased about $208 million, a good amount of which will be put into the engineering research programs, which is good. And DOE's Department of Energy's science programs were up about $26 million, again, a modest amount. All of which is good, not terribly exciting, but this is what we expected. And it sets us up nicely for 2021. Artificial intelligence, on the other hand, is a place where we scored quite well. Beginning of 2016, there were a couple pieces of legislation that IEEE-USA got behind and fought for on Capitol Hill, and almost all of them were signed into law in the last couple weeks. The COVID relief bill contained AI in Government Act, which we talked about before, which helps the federal government implement AI solutions and use AI technology. The NDAA, which finally was signed into law, it wasn't actually signed into law. Congress overrode the president's veto, included the National Artificial Intelligence Act, the Ensuring American Leadership Over International Standards Act, and had language encouraging NIST to develop AI standards, all of which we encouraged and worked with Congress on. The Ensuring American Leadership Over International Standards Act, which is a terrible name, but they didn't ask us for advice on that one. That pushes the federal government, the executive branch, to invest more money and resources into international standards development programs. Now, make this clear, international standards development programs in this context mean standards being developed by governments predominantly, not the IEEE standards development process, which is private companies and private individuals. But still, they are related. And the fact that the government is paying more attention to this is probably a good thing. IEEE-USA worked very hard to help Congress understand the difference between an independent standards development organization like IEEE and what we do, and international standards development programs, which are predominantly federal governments negotiating between themselves and is different than what we do. Some of the early versions of that act confused the two, and we worked hard to make sure it was kept clear. So overall, these were some fairly significant steps to implementing AI within the federal government, making it clear how AI should be adopted throughout society, responsibilities for people developing AI, money for research for AI, money for workforce development to make sure we have American workers who are capable of working in an AI environment, all of which is very good. We also have opportunities in 2021 to build on these successes to further strengthen the AI industry in the United States. More on that in a little while. A little note that just popped up recently, actually just a couple hours ago, right here as a matter of fact. The Department of Homeland Security released its final H1B lottery rule. You may recall last year, the administration announced new rules for distributing H1B visas. Typically, that is done through a lottery system. You apply, all the applications get dumped into a pot, and they just pull essentially 85,000 of them out at random, and that's who gets the visas. The new rule, which was issued today and will go into effect 60 days from today, the new rule uses kind of a tiered distribution process. Basically, it looks at every H1B application and says, okay, is this job going to pay less than average or more than average relative to other Americans in that, or Americans in that job category at that location? The Department of Labor takes every job in the country and ranks it according to how well it's paid, tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. Basically, it's the quartiles. So the top 25% of people in that job are type 4, type 3 is the next 25%, next 25, next 25%. So what the rule says is that, okay, we're going to look at all the H-1B jobs that have been that companies want to fill. And any company that's willing to pay a tier 4 salary, that's in the top 25% of all workers in the United States, we're going to fill those first. Once we've used all those up, then we'll fill all the number 3s, then all the number 2s. And if there are any visas left over, they'll be available for tier 1. Somewhere in that continuum, they're going to run out of visas. And at that point, that category, it's presumed that it will be category 2 jobs. Once they run out of visas for all the category 2 applicants, they'll decide those by lottery. But all the tier 3 and tier 4 jobs will still be filled. IEEE-USA is supportive of this position. It will encourage companies to overpay their H-1B workers. If they really need them, they will pay them. And discourage companies from outsourcing, because the whole goal of outsourcing is to pay H-1B workers less than comparable Americans. Well, that's a tier 1 job, and it will be difficult to fill those in the current distribution system. Now, it does need to be recognized that this will make it harder for entry-level workers to get H-1B visas, which is a problem, which is why IEEE-USA is going to be fighting extra hard this year to make sure we have a pathway for international students to get from student visa to green card within a year of graduating, so they don't have to worry about the H-1B program. Quick note on energy reform. I mentioned in our December update that the Senate had passed a package of energy reform bills at kind of the last minute, including energy research on energy efficiency, alternative energy, nuclear technology, nuclear energy technology, RPE, high-speed computing, a lot of other good things. Just want to note that these did in fact make it into the NDAA, and so they have now become law, representing the most significant win on energy reform that we've had in probably 5 to 7 years, which is, again, good news. I want to talk a little bit about the Fairness Act, because what happened with the Fairness Act at the end of last year is an excellent example of why IEEE-USA conducts itself the way it conducts itself in Washington. You will recall the Fairness Act would have eliminated the country caps from the EB visa program. The effect of that would have been to dramatically speed up the waiting time faced by people who are currently in the H-1B backlog or the EB backlog, some of whom have been there for a decade, almost all of whom are Indian, some are Chinese. But because demand is so high from India, most of the people in the backlog are from India. Unfortunately, the other consequence of the Fairness Act is everybody who is applying for an EB visa who is not from India or China would face a much longer wait. IEEE-USA did not take a position on the bill because it helps some of our members and hurts other of our members. But in attempting to pass the act, some advocates attacked Senator Dick Durbin. Senator Durbin is our top ally on immigration in the United States Senate. He is a longtime champion of immigrants and immigrant rights, and is very dedicated to trying to improve the high-skill visa system, including creating more green cards for skilled immigrants. and we've worked with him for a very long time. But because he knew the downside to the Fairness Act, he was an obstacle to getting the bill passed. And some advocates for the Fairness Act attacked Senator Durbin on his front lawn at his personal home in Illinois by calling him, among other things, an ethnic cleanser. Now, you could disagree with Mr. Durbin, Senator Durbin's position on the Fairness Act, but to suggest that he is in favor of executing an entire people is rather perverse. More to the point, Senator Dick Durbin is now poised to take over the Judiciary Committee. As chair of the Judiciary Committee, he would have more say than any other single senator over immigration policy. And the same advocates that attacked him last year because he wouldn't help them on the Fairness Act are unlikely to get a particularly good hearing when they go to talk to now Chairman Durbin, who now decides what immigration bills will move in the Senate. And this is why it is always important when we interact with legislators that we do so in a respectful way, and in a way that builds trust and cooperation. We can disagree with people, and when legislators do things we disagree with, we should criticize them. But we always have to do it in a very professional and reasonable way, because, as happened this year, you never know where people will end up down the line, and when people that you oppose today, you will have to have the support of in the future. We have an excellent working relationship with Senator Durbin. I will be meeting with his staff next week to discuss the senator's strategy and plans for 2021, and I look forward to sharing those with you at a future update. Turning to 2021, beginning of a Congress, beginning of an administration is always a time of optimism. There's always unlimited potential to get stuff done. Looking beyond just the kind of wild-eye optimism that sometimes we have to take as we start a legislative project in Washington, we do have some real opportunities in this Congress to get some good things finished. The R&D budget is poised for a significant increase. There is bipartisan support in both chambers of Congress for increasing investment in technology, things like AI and quantum computers, which an increasing number of legislators see as a national security concern. They see American competitiveness as hinging on our ability to stay ahead on technology. Importantly, our champion on this project in the Senate is Senator Chuck Schumer, who is likely to become the Senate Majority Leader, which is a good thing to have, a good person to have in charge of your legislative agenda. I'm going to have to pause for just a second. Apparently the plug in my computer has fallen out and I'm about to lose charge. Pardon me for just a moment. Sorry about that. So after the R&D budgets, NASA, we have an opportunity to do something good with. NASA needs to be reauthorized. Like most government programs, the law that allows NASA to exist expires periodically. It sunsets. This is normal. It gives Congress the opportunity to check to make sure that whatever program it is working properly, is still needed. NASA clearly is doing both. And so the reauthorization will pass at some point, probably this year, maybe next year. But the point is, the reauthorization process gives us a chance to help Congress set space policy for the next 5 years, which is rather exciting. We are already talking to some legislative staff about what that would look like, working on some little pieces of the reauthorization, cybersecurity in space being one of them, to help Congress get the policy right as they draft what is likely to be a very important piece of legislation. Immigration, always kind of iffy. The odds of immigration reform passing in 2021 or 22 is less than 50%, but it's considerably bigger than it was last year. For one thing, as I mentioned, Senator Durbin will be running the Judiciary Committee, and the ranking minority member will be Senator Chuck Grassley, who is another ally of ours on immigration reform. More to the point, the Fairness Act showed a lot of legislators that there's a real problem in the high-skill immigration system. And while a number of legislators didn't particularly like the solution that was being proposed, the basic problem is still there. And so I think we have an opportunity to go into Congress and say, listen, this is what's going on. This is why it's causing a problem. It's just not good to make high-skilled immigrants sit around for 15 years waiting for a green card to become available. We need to do better. This is what we should do. And since the basic argument that there's a problem has already been made, it makes the rest of the argument much easier. So I think we have an opportunity there. On AI, as I mentioned earlier, a number of big bills passed at the end of last year as part of other legislation. Senator Portman, Congressman McNerney, and a number of other legislators have already told us they want to do more in this area in the 117th Congress. We are already having conversations with staff about how we can frame the debate and help Congress understand the technology and move U.S. policy in a useful direction. Lastly, we've been talking about infrastructure for a number of years now, and nothing's happened. There will be another opportunity in 2021 and 2022 for Congress to move a large infrastructure reform bill. Part of that bill will be rural broadband. Rural broadband, this is money to help deploy rural broadband and make high-speed internet more accessible to everyone, which includes lower-income Americans in inner cities and not rural parts of the country, but mostly connecting it to the rural parts of our country that don't have good broadband service at the moment. There is broad bipartisan support for that, $730 million new dollars in the 2021 budget. There will be opportunities to get more money for those programs, but also make some policy adjustments to make broadband more accessible to all Americans in 2021. Again, the pandemic made the argument for rural broadband and ubiquitous broadband. It made the argument for us. And so now we're just arguing over details. So we have an opportunity to get that either in the infrastructure bill, in a standalone bill, or in some other piece of legislation. Also, legislation on the electrical grid. Legislation, laws, regulations to increase the stability of our grid, to make sure that Americans have access to cheap, ubiquitous electricity, and that the big grid is resilient, something that is very important to us and that we've been working on with Congress for a number of years. This is in addition to, obviously, the 2022 budget will need to be done this year, and there's lots of opportunities to do other things. We'll have a better understanding of what the administration's policies and priorities are in the next couple weeks once we get a better sense of who's going to fill the key positions. But I do suspect there'll be some opportunities on green card reform with the new administration, expanding access to green cards and making them easier to acquire. We expect to go to the Biden administration and talk about regulatory changes to make the green card process easier to navigate, as well as looking at the research environment. IEEE-USA led efforts a few years ago to simplify the regulations surrounding federal research, federally funded research. That was a good start. More can be done. We expect to find a sympathetic ear in the new administration to try to make it easier for academics and others to get federal grants and use them to do cutting-edge technology research. Which brings us to your role in all of this. Our 2021 CVD is on. It will not be the same as our congressional visit days from previous years because you will not be coming to Washington. However, just because you can't come here doesn't mean you can't meet with your representatives and senators. We are inviting every IEEE member in the United States to join us virtually for our 2021 CVD. Meetings will be held either by phone, conference call, or in your legislator's local office, not here in DC, but out wherever it is that you are, based on what the legislator wants to do and what our members in that district want to do. There'll have to be a dialogue about that. But IEEE-USA will help make that happen. Since none of you are going to be traveling for these meetings, we do not need to hold them on a given day. So we are targeting the last week of March for our meetings, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have to be on any particular day in that week, or even frankly that week. If they get pushed to the next week or the next week, that's perfectly fine. What's going to happen? The registration page will be open on the IEEE-USA website shortly, meaning it could be open now. It's supposed to be up sometime today, certainly by Monday at the latest. We are inviting all IEEE-USA members in the United States to register. Once we see who is interested in attending, we'll combine you into groups and contact your legislators on your behalf to schedule your meetings. Training will be done digitally in roughly this format. I will run several training sessions starting in late February and early March on how to do meetings, how to talk to a legislator, how to talk about policy. It's not actually all that hard. You'll be fine. And we will be sending you your leave behind material and backup material virtually, digitally. We'll email it to you. We will then help set up your calls, your video conferences, or your meetings, and then you will hold them sometime in late March or early April. This is not quite as good as coming to Washington and meeting in the legislator's office. It's not quite as much fun. Going up to Capitol Hill is always fun and exciting. But this still is a very, very effective way to connect with our new Congress and our new congressional leaders. That is especially true for the 70 or so districts and states in this country with new legislators, new members of Congress, who don't necessarily know who we are and who will need to be introduced to both IEEE and to the engineering community in their district and state. And so this is an important year to come in and, well, virtually come in and meet with legislators. It still should be a great deal of fun, and I know it will be extremely effective in helping our legislators understand the technology community and the challenges and promises of technological innovation. So I encourage everybody on this call to register. As I said, the registration should be up later today, and if not, certainly by Monday. And I look forward to speaking to all of you in our training sessions sometime next month or early March. Our next legislative update will be January 22nd. That's right after the inaugural. We should have a very good idea of who will be running the various pieces of Congress, both in terms of who the leaders in the Senate are and who the committee chairs are, as well as ranking minority members of the various committees. We should also have a better sense of what exactly the Biden administration will look like, who will hold key posts, and what their top priorities will be. So I hope you'll join us. I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA here in Washington, D.C. Our phone number, my phone number, is 202-530-8326. My email address is r.t.harrison@ieee.org. Feel free to reach out anytime. And with that, I'm going to switch over to our other screen. If you have any comments, questions, concerns about anything we talked about today, please feel free to put it in the chat box. Ooh, lots of chatting today. Excellent. Let me scroll up to the top here. Don asks why there would be entry-level H1B jobs. Yeah, see, that's actually an interesting point, isn't it? Technically, H1B jobs are supposed to go to people with specialized skills that cannot be found anywhere else, which generally would not mean not entry-level positions. Two things. First of all, we do, of course, have extraordinary college graduates who may have particular skills that you just can't find anywhere else. I mean, there are some uniquely brilliant people coming out of our colleges that would qualify for an H-1B, although those folks would also typically qualify for an O visa, which is a green card. The problem, Don, is that because our green card system is so clogged up and such a mess, it is impossible almost for particularly international students from India and China to stay in the country and work after graduating without going to an H-1B because it takes too long to get a green card. And so we have a situation where if the H-1Bs are not available, they can't stay. IEEE-USA is trying to build a bridge so the students can become workers and Americans without going through the H-1B program. But without that bridge, it gets pretty messy. Now, there is an OPT program, the Optional Practical Training Program, which allows graduates to stay and work for 3 years. So we do have some time to figure this all out. But we are going to need to fix the system in a more comprehensive way, other than just blocking all college graduates from the H-1B. Mr. Ruth, is the 50-50 Senate split likely to encourage senators to work together? Yeah, your guess is as good as mine there, Mr. Ricori. Presumably, they're going to have to work together. And I suspect what will happen is a couple senators like Senator Manchin from West Virginia, like Senator Collins from Maine, Murkowski from Alaska, Peters from Michigan probably, they will take the role of mediators. And they will play a crucial role of talking to the other side to find some middle ground. The problem is I think all of you are aware, there's a lot of tension up on Capitol Hill right now, and the two parties really aren't doing a lot of communicating. So I suspect the 50-50 split is not going to encourage Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer to become best friends. But this isn't the first time the two parties haven't liked each other in American history. And with one very unfortunate exception, we always find a way to make it work. And that's one of the strengths of our system, is there's lots of ways to work around roadblocks. And so I suspect some senators will find ways to work with each other, and the rest of them will go along with it because they know they need to get something done, and that they'll muddle through. And that's usually what we end up doing anyway. Will Robinson asks, is there an opportunity to comment on the new H-1B rule? And the answer is probably no, because it is a final rule. We did comment on the draft rule back in October or November, but this is the final one. And so it is now done. I want to read the final rule before deciding if we should issue a press statement on it. I want to make sure that it says what I think it says. Like I said, it just came out a couple hours ago, and it's a fairly big rule. So it's going to take me a little, the weekend to read it. But so we might make a public statement, but we can't formally comment on it because it's done. Yeah, I think I said March 29th. It's March 22nd. The last it's the last couple days of March and the first couple days of April. And so it does overlap with Easter, which is the Sunday after we're aiming for CVD. So I guess it is the 29th. And the reason for that, Don, is that legislators take the week before and after Easter to go home. That's a recess. So legislators will be back in the district and therefore more accessible for a virtual CVD. Brendan Godfrey asked me a series of questions that's disguised just one question. Section 230 is part of the Communication Act of 1996 that gives online platforms immunity from prosecution for actionable things that are said on their platforms. Basically, if you say something that is slanderous or treasonous or something other, it's a threat of violence or something on Facebook, the legal authorities can come after you for saying it, and presumably somebody could sue you for saying it if you slander them or it's libelous or something like that. But you can't sue Facebook because they're not responsible for what other people put on their website. There will be talk about reforming that. I suspect it will be discussed in the context of broader digital reforms. But we're still in the same place we were last year, only more so. Both the Republicans and Democrats think that we need to do something to rein in the power of the big tech companies. But they don't agree on either what that power is or what should be done about it. And in some ways, the two parties are working against each other on this one. So the fact that everybody thinks that something should be changed doesn't mean anything if nobody can agree on what that change should be. So I suspect it'll be discussed, but I think we're pretty far from Congress actually doing something about it. On cybersecurity, this is in all the appropriations bills. There's extra money to help the federal government do more to secure their cyber assets. There will be talk about broader societal cybersecurity bills. And the administration is going to have to put some thought into what we should do in response to cyber attacks. I think this is going to be a perennial debate moving forward. as more of our lives and our economy go online, securing those lives and that economy online is going to become both harder and more important. IEEE-USA will remain at the forefront of groups in Washington helping legislators understand what cybersecurity means and how to achieve it, and working with legislators to craft policies to protect, all of us online. Digital privacy. Digital privacy is kind of the same place as Section 230. There is a broad consensus that something needs to be done to strengthen digital privacy rights, but there is not consensus on what that should be. I think we're closer to a consensus on digital privacy than Section 230. I expect legislation. Whether it'll be a priority or not, I don't know. But right now, the states are kind of driving that discussion. And the more states that adopt digital privacy rules that are not the same as other states, the more there will be pressure on Congress to step in and make a national law. We can't have 50 different sets of digital privacy rights. It just doesn't work. Companies can't keep track of that amount of stuff. And so we're going to eventually need a national law. Congress kind of knows that, but they haven't decided what the law should look like yet. So we're still a little ways off from them actually passing it, but at least they're talking about it, which is, an important first step. IEEE-USA is working with Congressman Ro Khanna, who has been a leader on this issue in Congress and has been tapped by Nancy Pelosi to lead the Democrats' efforts on this area. So we're looking forward to working with him again in this Congress. Student visas. I don't see a lot of legislation on student visas because most of the changes to the student visa program came via executive order and regulation. And the Biden administration will undo all of those, most of which will be undone fairly quickly. Beyond that, we're hoping we can get legislation making student visas dual intent, which will make it easier for international students to get green cards and to immigrate. And of course, to build that bridge between student visa and green card, which is not going to be done through a student visa. It'll have to be done through something else. But that'll, obviously impact students and their ability to stay and work in this country. Tom, former IEEE-USA president, Tom Coughlin, thank you. Good question. All of the information on the 2021 CVD is on the IEEE-USA website. That information has already been updated. The registration link will be there, as I said, shortly. IEEEUSA.org/advocacy. There's a little menu that will pop up if you go to our homepage. Click on the Set CVD. There you go. And yes, I am hoping that a lot more people will be able to participate. We are, frankly, slightly nervous here in IEEE-USA headquarters that so many people will volunteer to meet with their legislators that will have a hard time handling all the requests for meetings, which is a problem I hope to have shortly. And we'll deal with it when it comes up. Oh, and I believe Jonathan, my producer here, has already answered that in the chat box. Thank you, Jonathan. Brendan, we haven't heard a lot of talk about the AB5 and independent consultants rules yet, so I don't know what to tell you about that. I know there's going to be a debate about this. There's going to be a debate about it because the Department of Labor has rules pending that would implement a national rule on how to define an independent contractor that is in great conflict with AB5, the California state law. Democrats also are championing the PRO Act, which would basically make AB5 a national law, which would be problematic for technology consultants. IEEE-USA will be meeting with supporters of the PRO Act. I expect a version of the PRO Act to pass the House. Whether it gets signed into law, I'm very skeptical of. It passed the House in the last Congress overwhelmingly, well, with overwhelming Democratic support, not very much Republican support. But a lot of the legislators that voted for it knew it was kind of a rough draft. They were voting for it in principle, but knew some of the details had to be worked out. We're going to start talking to people to work out those details in the next couple of weeks. I don't suspect that will be a top priority of the Democrats in Congress, but I do expect it to come up eventually, and we will be working with legislators when it does. Okay, I think I got everything. If you have more questions, if something comes up between here and our next conference call, please feel free to contact me directly. You have my phone number, 202-530-8326, and my email, r.t for Thomas.harrison@IEEE.org. Please feel free to reach out anytime. And with that, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I look forward to talking with you again right after our inaugural.
My superpower is engineering. I've been a roboticist almost all my life now. I think engineering is just as creative as the arts. Engineers, we solve problems. It impacts the world. It makes a difference. Without IEEE, I don't think I would have the network that I have. Anyone can get involved with IEEE-USA at any time. There's an immense amount of value for anyone at any career stage.